Okay, welcome back. This is the next video in the series where we're looking at how we calculate commissions in a complex environment. And we've so far been looking at how we can break apart, decompose the problem of calculating commissions into component parts. Each of those component parts has got its own responsibilities, its own life cycle, and its own requirements. And by breaking them out into these components, we're reducing the scope of the problem, or we're changing the scope of the problem. It allows us to refocus on solving one small part at a time. And so now we're going to look at allocations. Now, allocations, you might refer to them as something else, but allocations refer to how an account, so that could be a customer or a division of a customer, is allocated or assigned to a member of your team or your organization's teams, whether that's in business development, sales, account management, something like that, at a given point in time. And the purpose behind doing that is so that you can decide, well, if there's a sale, who should receive any commission. So the first part of this is really to acknowledge that tracking of allocation is a process in its own right. It's something that has a life cycle. There are workflows. Naturally, if we look at an organization, typically people join and people leave, and people move around within those organizations. Whenever we run a month end, we're potentially taking a snapshot of what the organization looks like at that point in time. We're not necessarily looking at what the organization will look like next month or used to look like last month. We're building a snapshot of what it looks like right now. So if we have a look at this example, this is a spreadsheet, a very, very simple spreadsheet that contains a list of team members and the teams that they belong to. And what I've got here is a date, a reference date, that describes the date at which we had a look at these assignments or these groups that the people believed. That date represents a snapshot of which teams these people belong to at that point in time. So January 2025 in this case. So if we were to run our January 2025 month-end process to calculate commissions, say we're on the 31st of January, and we want to calculate all the commissions for the month, what we're going to need to do is identify who those commissions should be paid to. So somewhere in our system, we will have something that records, let's say, a customer and a BD representative, a business development representative, or an account manager. So we might have customer A. So we might have customer A, and it could be that Bob is the representative for that customer. So when we come to the end of the month and we want to have a look at the commissions that should be paid to Bob, we could have a look and say, what are all the customers that are assigned to Bob and what sales activity has taken place that should result in Bob being paid some form of commission. Now, this is a very simplistic view, and it's probably one of the first views of allocations that we would come to. Is quite straightforward. We consider that the whole of January for customer A belongs to Bob from a commission standpoint. But the reality is actually a lot more complicated than that, because people can switch teams mid-month potentially. That's kind of less of a problem, although it does present its own challenges. But people can, move from one team to another. And also we can have sales cycles that might have been started 2 months ago but that don't complete for another month. And so from that perspective, if Bob started a sales cycle in November with customer A, and then in January he moved to another team, but then that sale completes in February, does Bob still get the commission, or should it be given to someone else who's replaced Bob? So we start to get all sorts of scenarios that we need to think about. And hopefully this is a reinforcement of the fact that just the process of allocation in itself is a distinct set of requirements. This doesn't mean that we have to calculate any percentages of anything at this stage. We don't have to look for commission bands. We don't have to sum the total amount of sales done. All we have to know is, at this point in time, who should this sale belong to? Who should this commission be given to? And so what we also start to get into are things like cancellations or refunds or downsells. Quite often, what will happen, and the rules will vary from business to business, but if we started the sale in November and it was Bob who was the business development representative throughout that period of time, it may well be we've got a business rule that says from February onwards, this transfers to Alice, who's in account management. So we're saying, okay, let's say this was a new account that was won in November. This sits with business development for the first 3 months. And then after 3 months, it switches to account management. So we need to be able to track that change. And it's really important that when we come to run our month end in February, not only do we know that this has been changed to Alice as being the representative, we also need to know that any new business that happens from February forward should be attributed to Alice. But if there's a downgrade that happens, let's say on the 1st of February or the 5th of February, Bob sold something back here in November, and then on the 1st of February, the customer said, actually, you know what, I want to downgrade, or I'm going to cancel. Well, we wouldn't take that from Alice. It wouldn't really be fair for us to, if this was worth 1,000 here, and then on this date, the customer said, I want to downgrade, it wouldn't be fair to start Alice with minus 500 on that customer. She's had absolutely no involvement up until that point. And again, this is going to be organizational specific. Those rules are going to differ from organization to organization. In some organizations, well, maybe that is the way it works. But realistically, we need to not only know at this point in time, when we come to February, to say anything that is sold in February belongs to Alice, but anything that was cancelled on a previous sale, that should be attributed back to whoever was the person that sold it. So we need this ability to go forward and back in time, or we need to go from today backwards to account for anything like a refund, a reimbursement, a cancellation, that type of thing. So hopefully what that shows is this model where we just have the team member and the team that they belong to, and the customer and their representative. Perhaps BD representative is slightly misleading. We'll just call that representative. This isn't really sufficient. We're losing information about when was this person the representative for this business? When was this person in this team? So we can address that reasonably in a reasonably straightforward fashion. There's a number of options. They all have their pros and cons, so to speak. But a simple way to address this would be to expand our model a little bit. So we can address this. We can modify this model a little bit to help us account for those changes that happen over time. The assignment of a person to a team and the assignment of a customer to a person. So the first part of that is to say that we have a time dimension. There is an element of time involved with membership of a team. Here we can say Bob was a member of the business development team from the 1st of January 2024, and we've just got some arbitrary date in the future. I'll put 2100. Pretty sure Bob will have moved on by then. Same for Alice. So we can just say from this point forward, Bob and Alice are in the business development teams. And what we would do is say, well, if Bob moved to the account management team, let's say on the 5th of the 1st, 2025, we can update this table. So we can always go back to this table and say, what team has Bob been a member of? And say, well, he's been in Business Dev 1 and Account Management 1. And we could say, well, when was he in that team? For what period of time was he in each of those teams? And we can also do something very similar for the allocation of customers or accounts to team members. So we can have customer, team member, and then the same from date to date. And we could say that Bob was the team member that customer A was assigned to from the 1st of November 2024 to the 4th of the 1st, 2025. The point at which Bob moved from account management to, from business development, the point at which Bob moved from business development to account management, customer A was Bob's customer. And then we might say that customer was reassigned to Jack on the 5th of the 1st, 2025. And what we might also then say is at the end of January, if there's this 3-month period that a customer moves from business development into account management, we might then say customer A actually ended up moving back to Bob on the 1st of the 2nd, or perhaps it moved to Alice in the account management team. So this is allowing both things to operate independently of each other, because actually they do operate independently of each other. The assignment of a customer to a team member is independent of a team member moving between different teams. And just that little bit of splitting those two things out and recognizing that those are distinct entities, relationships that we want to track, that immediately starts to break the problem of allocations apart to a point where it's much easier for us to start modeling, well, what are the processes involved? What are the life cycles? And those life cycles become really much more important in something like allocations than they perhaps do in specific commission bands. Although they do have their own life cycles, I would suggest that they would typically have quite different life cycles to people within teams. But yeah, those life cycles become much more important here. Okay, so we've gone through some reasonably technical ideas. We've looked at how specifically we might store some of the data that describes which teams our team members are part of. And it's quite a straightforward thing for us to do, to put some dates that represent the ranges of time or the membership that those people had of those teams. And the same for our customers when we're allocating customers or accounts or whatever your unit of kind of commission ownership is, whether it's an individual contact, whether it's an entire customer, whether it's a specific division of a customer. It's the same principle that we want to be able to track who the team member is associated with that individual customer, that individual unit over time. And again, having the from date and the to date make that easy for us to do. There are other ways that we can track this, definitely, but this, I think, conceptually is quite a straightforward one. And it becomes a good way of describing the requirement, because at some point this will need to be built by someone. You may well be building it yourself, but if you go to an engineering team, describing the requirement in this way to them, they will immediately have a level of understanding that is way beyond a lot of words to describe the life cycle. They will immediately be able to see that looking at a table that includes the team member, the from date and the to date, they will immediately understand that there is a life cycle associated with that. And the same for the allocation of that team member to an account. So to wrap that up, I think the final kind of important detail with this, with allocations specifically, is that we need to treat it as its own month-end process. However we go about collecting data on the organizational hierarchy, which team is Bob in today when this process runs, or as of the end of this month, which team was Bob in? Same with Alice, same with Jack, same with anyone else. That has got its own set of requirements around it. It's got its own governance around it. You will need some form of cross-check to make sure that Bob is still a member of the organization, that is still a part of business development or account management or any other team. And then separately, the task of ensuring that Bob is the correct business development representative assigned to customer A between the 1st of November and the 4th of January. There's a verification that needs to happen there, and there's some data collection that needs to happen, and a governance process. So it's really important to treat the allocations, the build of that data set, the management of it, and the governance of it as an independent month-end process. And it's something that could run daily, ultimately, and it probably should run daily, because then it will capture changes that happen throughout the month. If you're in a situation where people are moving teams more than once a day, then it's still possible. It's still entirely doable. I would be very surprised if that happens, but at least running it daily allows you to capture all of those changes. And the model that we looked at there is entirely capable of supporting that data capture. So this concludes the video on allocations. And in the next videos, we'll be looking at the additional components that we need to bring the whole of sales commissions to life.